Saisha Hammond stood rigid on a dusty Pine Hollow road, hands up, staring into Sheriff Luther Kane's trembling revolver, his deputies snickering like they'd already won. Her calm defiance rattled him, but when her military ID slipped from her jacket, landing face up with Lieutenant General U.S. Army retired, glaring back, Kane's sneer twitched. He spat a vile slur, gun steady, doubling down. She lived, but the half-finished standoff promised war, one that had burned Pine Hollow to ash. What's Kane hiding to risk it all? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand against corruption's chokehold on justice, hit like and subscribe for more raw, real stories like this. Saisha Hammond pulled into Pine Hollow 3 days before the standoff, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt of this rural Tennessee town. She'd come to settle her brother Marcus's estate, a task she figured would take a week, tops. 59 years old with 30 years of commanding troops under her belt, she was used to chaos, but this was supposed to be simple. She parked her black SUV outside Marcus's weathered shotgun house, its sagging porch creaking under her boots as she stepped out. The air hung heavy with humidity, thick with the drone of cicadas, and she grabbed her duffel bag from the back seat. Feeling the weight of exhaustion after the 6-hour drive from Nashville, she unlocked the front door, the stale smell of neglect hitting her as she crossed the threshold. Marcus had been gone 6 months, felled by a heart attack, and the place still held his ghost in every chipped coffee mug and faded photo on the mantel. Aisha set her bag down, poured herself a glass of iced tea from a pitcher she'd brought, and stepped onto the porch, settling into a rickety chair to watch the sun dip lower. The street stretched quiet before her, lined with squat houses and oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. A postcard of small-town America, if you ignored the undercurrent of something sour. She took a sip, the cold liquid soothing her parched throat, when she caught movement across the road. An older white man in a flannel shirt stood watering his patchy lawn, his eyes locking onto her, with a stare so cold it could have frosted the glass in her hand. Aisha raised her hand in a polite wave, but he turned away, hose still dribbling, pretending she didn't exist. She frowned, brushing it off, her mind ticking back to decades of steeling herself against worse. In Desert Storm, she'd faced enemy fire. In boardrooms, she'd outmaneuvered petty generals with fragile egos. One rude neighbor wasn't worth her energy. She leaned back, letting the evening settle, when a pickup truck rumbled past, slowing just enough for her to catch the driver's squint, another hard look that lingered too long. Pine Hollow was sizing her up, and she didn't fit the mold. The next morning, she drove into town, needing groceries to stock the empty kitchen. At the corner store, a bell jingled as she stepped inside, the air cool and smelling of stale cigarettes. She grabbed a basket, filling it with bread, eggs, and a jar of peanut butter, keeping her movements brisk. The clerk, a wiry white kid with acne scars, rang her up, his eyes barely lifting from the counter. She handed him a 20, and he slid back her change $3 short. Aisha cleared her throat, voice even. "You owe me $3 more." He muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, but the word uppity slithered out clear enough. She fixed him with a stare that had once silenced a rowdy platoon, and he fumbled in the register, shoving the bills at her without meeting her gaze. She pocketed the cash, jaw tight, and walked out, the bells chime mocking her exit. Lunch was worse. She stopped at Dolly's Diner, a squat building with peeling paint and a neon sign flickering in the noon heat. The place was half full, mostly white faces turning to watch her as she slid into a booth. A waitress, blonde and chewing gum, sauntered over, notepad in hand, but her eyes stayed on the ceiling. Aisha ordered a turkey sandwich and coffee, keeping it simple. 20 minutes ticked by, then 30, the clatter of plates hitting other tables while hers stayed bare. She flagged the waitress down, voice calm but firm. "My order coming anytime soon?" The woman popped her gum, shrugging. "Must have slipped my mind." Aisha caught the smirk tugging at her lips, the unspoken message clear. "You're not welcome here." She paid for the coffee she'd sipped waiting, left a single dime as a tip and walked out, stomach growling but pride intact. She'd faced snipers with less venom than this town dished out over a sandwich. Back at the house, she unloaded her groceries, the encounters gnawing at her but not breaking her stride. She'd dealt with prejudice before, from basic training to the Pentagon, where white colonels had sneered at her stars. Pine Hollow was just another battlefield, and she wasn't staying long enough to fight it. That afternoon, she met Jamal Porter, a lean black man in his 40s, at his auto shop 2 blocks over. He'd kept Marcus's old Ford running, and Aisha needed someone to check her SUV's oil before the trip back. Jamal wiped grease from his hands, offering a warm handshake, his smile a rare break in the town's chill. "You're Marcus's sister, huh? Heard you were coming." His voice carried a drawl softened by kindness, and Aisha nodded, relaxing for the first time since arriving. They chatted about Marcus, about the shop, and then Jamal's tone shifted, low and serious. "Watch yourself around here, Ms. Hammond. Sheriff Luther Kane don't take to folks like us stirring things up." Aisha raised an eyebrow, leaning against her SUV. "I've handled worse than small-town sheriffs." Jamal didn't smile back, his eyes flicking to the street. "Not like Kane, he's got this place locked down tight. Cross him, and it's more than a hard stare you'll get." She chuckled, brushing off the warning with the confidence of someone who'd stared down warlords. "I'm here to sell a house, not start a revolution. He won't even know I'm around." Jamal shook his head, unconvinced, but went to work on her engine, leaving her to sit on a stool by the garage door, watching the quiet street. The oil change took 20 minutes, and she paid him cash, promising to stop by if she needed anything else. Driving back, the sky bruising purple with dusk, she felt the day's weight settle into her bones. She turned onto Marcus's road, the SUV's headlights cutting through the gloom, when she noticed a shadow in her rearview mirror. A patrol car, no lights, no siren, just creeping behind her, close enough to kiss her bumper. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her speed steady, hands firm on the wheel. It followed her all the way to the house, idling at the curb as she parked. She stepped out, locking eyes with the driver through the windshield. Sheriff Luther Kane, his broad face shadowed under a Stetson, stared back, unblinking. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, a hulking silhouette radiating menace. Aisha stood her ground, refusing to flinch, until he finally rolled forward, tires crunching gravel. She waited until the taillights vanished around the bend, then let out a slow breath, her mind ticking. This wasn't random. Kane had marked her, and she'd dismissed Jamal's warning too easily. She climbed the porch steps, tea glass still, sweating on the railing from earlier, and sank back into the chair, the night closing in around her. The cicadas buzzed louder now, a restless chorus, and she sipped the warm, flat tea, replaying the day. The clerk's sneer, the waitress's neglect, the neighbor's silence, and now Kane's silent stalk. Pine Hollow wasn't just unwelcoming, it was coiled, waiting to strike. She set the glass down, resolve hardening. She'd faced worse odds and walked away. A week, she told herself. Just a week to tie up Marcus's loose ends and she'd be gone, leaving this backwater in her dust. But as she stared into the dark, Kane's patrol car lingered in her mind, a predator circling its prey. Then it happened. She was halfway to the door when headlights flashed again, slicing through the night. Kane's car rolled back, slower this time, stopping dead in front of the house. He stepped out, boots hitting the ground with a thud, his frame massive against the glow of his high beams. He didn't draw his gun, not yet, but his hand rested on the holster, thumb brushing the strap. "Evening," he drawled, voice thick with menace. "Got a report of a stranger causing trouble. That you?" Aisha faced him, spine straight, voice cool. "Just visiting family, Sheriff. No trouble here." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing, a smirk curling his lips. "Round here, your kind always means trouble. Consider this a friendly heads up. Keep your head down or I'll put it down for you." He tossed her license, plucked from some unseen file onto the porch steps, the plastic skittering across wood. It landed upside down, her name glinting in the light, and he turned back to his car, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Aisha watched him drive off, fists clenched, knowing this was no idle warning. Kane wasn't just watching her, he was hunting her, and she'd just stepped into his crosshairs. Aisha Hammond gripped the steering wheel tighter as the late afternoon sun dipped below the Tennessee pines, casting jagged shadows across the winding road back to Marcus's house in Pine Hollow. She'd spent the day sorting through faded tacks, records and dusty photo albums, Her brother's life reduced to paper stacks in a quiet corner of his cluttered living room. Her black SUV hummed along, the engine's low rumble a steady companion after 2 days of the town's simmering hostility. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 5:32, and figured she'd heat up some leftover chili for dinner, maybe call her friend Nadia to vent about the clerk's sneer and the diner's cold shoulder. The road stretched empty ahead, flanked by overgrown ditches and rusted mailboxes, a stillness that felt too heavy for a Thursday evening. Then a flicker in her rearview mirror jolted her senses awake, red and blue lights pulsing like a predator's eyes. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her speed steady at 35 miles per hour, well under the limit. She hadn't swerved, hadn't missed a stop sign, hadn't given any reason for this. Yet here it was, Sheriff Luther Kane's patrol car, closing the gap, his silhouette hulking behind the windshield. She pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, tires crunching, and killed the engine, her military instincts kicking in sharp and automatic. Hands at 10 and 2, window down, face neutral, she dealt with law enforcement plenty over the years, from base checkpoints to foreign soil. Stay calm, stay factual, don't escalate. That was the drill. The crunch of boots on loose stones snapped her focus to the side mirror. Kane approached, slow and deliberate, his tan uniform crisp against the fading light, hand hovering near his holstered revolver like a coiled snake. His deputies, Boyd and Travis, flanked him, their smirks visible even from 20 feet away. Kane stopped at her window, his broad frame blotting out the sun, and leaned in close enough for her to smell the tobacco on his breath. "License and registration," he barked, voice rough as gravel, no trace of courtesy in his tone. Aisha nodded once, keeping her movements slow, and reached for her wallet on the passenger seat. "Good afternoon, Sheriff. Mind telling me why I'm being stopped?" Her words were even, polite, but his eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation sparking in them. "Busted tail light," he growled, jabbing a thick finger toward the back of her SUV. Aisha's brow furrowed, her mind racing. Back to that morning when she checked the vehicle herself. A habit from years of pre-mission inspections. Both taillights had glowed red and steady. "That's odd," she said, voice cool. "They were working fine when I left the house." Kane's lip curled, a sneer twisting his weathered face. "Don't get smart with me, girl. Around here, I say it's busted, it's busted." The word girl landed like a slap, laced with venom and a racial edge that made her skin prickle. She handed over her license and registration, her fingers steady despite the heat rising in her chest. He snatched the papers, barely glancing at them before tossing her license into the dirt beside the car, the plastic skidding across pebbles. "Step out," he ordered, straightening up, his hand now resting fully on his gun. Aisha blinked, her pulse quickening but her face a mask. Of control. "Excuse me?" she said, voice low, testing the ground. Kane leaned in again, his shadow swallowing her space. "Out of the vehicle now, or I haul you in for resisting." His tone was a blade, sharp and final. She weighed her options, decades of discipline clashing with the raw injustice of the moment. She knew her rights, knew he had no probable cause, but she also knew the math. 1 black woman, 3 armed white men, a town that didn't care. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the gravel, her boots planting firm as if she were stepping onto a battlefield. At 5'8", she stood tall, shoulders squared, her presence a quiet challenge to their smirks. Kane circled her, his boots scuffing the ground while Boyd and Travis closed in, their eyes glinting with something ugly. "What's this about, Sheriff?" she asked, keeping her hands visible, her tone steady, despite the fury simmering beneath. Kane stopped in front of her, towering at 6'3", his Stetson casting a shadow over his hard blue eyes. "It's about you thinking you run things around here," he spat, then nodded to Boyd. "Check the car." Boyd, wiry with a buzz cut, swaggered to the driver's side, rummaging through the glove box while Travis, stocky and scowling, popped the trunk. Aisha watched, her jaw tightening as they tore through her belongings, her canvas gym bag spilling socks and a spare shirt onto the back seat. Boyd emerged a minute later, holding up a hunting knife, its blade glinting in the dusk. "Well, look at this," he drawled, tossing it to Kane. "Concealed weapon." Aisha's stomach dropped, her mind snapping to clarity. "That's not mine," she said, voice cutting through the air. "You planted it." Kane chuckled, a low, guttural sound, twirling the knife in his hand. "Fancy titles don't mean—" "Squat here, lady. You're under arrest." Before she could protest, Travis lunged forward, yanking her arms behind her back with a force that made her shoulder pop. Cold steel bit into her wrists as handcuffs snapped tight, the metal pinching her skin. She gritted her teeth, refusing to wince, her mind racing for an out. "I'm a retired Lieutenant General U.S. Army," she said, loud enough for all three to hear, hoping the weight of her rank might shift the dynamic. Kane laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the trees. "Don't care if you're the damn president's mama. Around here, my word's law, and your kind don't get special treatment." Boyd shoved her toward the patrol car, his grip bruising her arm, while Travis kicked the knife into the ditch like it was trash. Aisha's eyes locked on Kane as he strode ahead, his smirk a promise of worse to come. The back seat of the patrol car smelled of sweat and stale coffee, the plastic seat hard against her spine as they slammed the door shut. The drive to the station was short, 10 minutes through Pine Hollow's quiet streets, but it felt like an eternity. Faces peered from porches, white locals gawking at the spectacle, a black woman cuffed and flanked by deputies. She kept her head high, refusing to shrink, but the humiliation burned deep, a wound she hadn't felt since her early days in uniform, when white recruits had whispered slurs behind her back. At the station, a squat brick building with flickering lights, they hauled her inside, the linoleum floor sticky under her boots. Kane barked orders, and Boyd shoved her into a holding cell, the iron bars clanging shut with a sound that rattled her bones. The cell was small, 8 by 10, with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a toilet stained brown with rust. She stood, their wrists aching, watching Kane through the bars as he leaned against the desk outside, lighting a cigarette. "Get comfy," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "You're in my house now, and this is just the start." His eyes gleamed, with malice, a predator savoring its catch. Aisha sat slowly, her back against the cold concrete, her mind shifting from shock to strategy. She'd been in tighter spots, from ambushes in Iraq to political traps in DC, but this was personal, raw and racial in a way that cut deeper than bullets. They thought they'd broken her, but they'd only lit a fuse. She flexed her cuffed, hands the metal digging in, and replayed the stop in her head. The taillight lie, the planted knife, the cuffs, all of it a setup to put her in her place. Kane wasn't just a bully with a badge, he was a kingpin guarding his fiefdom, and she'd dared to step onto his turf. She'd get out, she told herself. Nadia would make sure of it, but this wasn't the bottom. Kane's parting words echoed in her skull. Just the start, a promise of escalation she couldn't ignore. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes, fury hardening into resolve. They'd drawn first blood, but she'd fought wars they couldn't imagine. This was her fight now, whether she'd wanted it or not. What do you think, folks? Should Aisha have backed down to avoid Kane's wrath, or was standing tall the only way to face a tyrant like him? Comment number 1 if you think she's right to dig in against this racist power grab. Like and subscribe if you're rooting for her to turn the tables on these small-town thugs, because this story's heating up fast. Can Aisha outsmart a sheriff who bends the law to his will, or has she just stepped into a trap she can't escape? Aisha Hammond sat stiffly on the edge of the metal bench in the Pine Hollow jail cell, her wrist still raw from the handcuffs that had bitten into her skin the night before. The air smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant, the flickering fluorescent, light overhead, casting jagged shadows across the cracked concrete walls. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through every second of Sheriff Luther Kane's ambush, the fake taillight, the planted knife, the cuffs snapping tight while his deputies smirked. At 59, with 30 years of military service behind her, she'd faced worse than a night in a filthy lockup, but the sting of this lingered, a personal attack fueled by raw racial hatred. She'd stared down Kane through those bars, his tobacco-stained grin promising more pain, and she'd vowed to fight back. Dawn crept in, grey and sluggish, filtering through a high, grimy window when the cell door clanked open. Deputy Boyd stepped inside, his buzz-cut head gleaming under the light, and tossed her a paper bag with her wallet and keys. "You're out," he grunted. No explanation, no apology. Aisha stood, slow and deliberate, her muscles stiff, but her resolve ironclad. She walked out of the station into the muggy Tennessee morning, the parking lot quiet except for the rumble of a familiar engine. Nadia Price, her attorney friend from Nashville, leaned against her silver sedan, arms crossed, her sharp brown eyes scanning Aisha from head to toe. At 42, Nadia wore her power suit like armor, her braided hair pulled back tight, radiating, the kind of confidence that had won her cases against crooked cops before. "You look like hell," she said, voice dry but warm, stepping forward to pull Aisha into a quick, fierce hug. Aisha managed a faint smile, her throat tight. "Feel like it too." Nadia handed her a coffee, steaming in a to-go cup, and explained she'd called in a favor with a county judge she knew from law school. The knife charge was flimsy, no evidence chain, and the judge had tossed it by midnight, forcing Kane to cut her loose. Aisha sipped the coffee, the bitter heat grounding her, and felt a flicker of triumph spark in her chest. "He's not untouchable," she said, more to herself than Nadia. "Not if we hit him where it counts." They drove to the Pine Hollow courthouse, a squat limestone building with chipped columns and a Confederate flag still flapping defiantly out front. Aisha's boots echoed on the tiled floor as she strode inside, Nadia at her side, a stack of complaint forms already filled. Out in her hands, she'd spent the sleepless night plotting this move, channeling her fury into action. The clerk, a middle-aged white woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Doris, sat behind the counter, her fingers pausing over a keyboard as Aisha approached. "I'm filing a complaint against Sheriff Luther Kane," Aisha said, voice steady, sliding the papers across the scarred wood. "Harassment, false arrest, racial profiling, abuse of power." Doris skimmed the first page, her lips pressing into a thin line, then glanced up with a look that hovered between pity and warning. "You sure about this, ma'am? Kane's got a long reach around here. Complaints like this, they tend to get lost." Aisha leaned in, her gaze locking with Doris's. "File it. I don't scare easy." Doris sighed, stamping the forms with a reluctant thud, and handed Aisha a receipt, her voice dropping low. "Just don't hold your breath." Outside, Aisha felt the air shift, a fleeting sense of victory warming her bones. She'd struck back, put Kane on notice, and the legal gears were turning, however slowly. Nadia clapped her on the shoulder, grinning. "First blood's ours. He'll think twice now." Aisha nodded, climbing into Nadia's car, the weight of the night lifting just enough to let her breathe. She'd faced him down, walked out of his cage, and now she had leverage. They stopped at Marcus's house, Aisha grabbing a change of clothes from her duffel, the familiar creak of the porch steps grounding her. Nadia dropped her off with a promise to dig deeper into Kane's record, leaving Aisha alone with her thoughts and a plan to call Jamal later for a ride into town. She showered off the jail's grime, pulled on a fresh shirt and stepped outside to check the mailbox, the late afternoon sun slanting through the oaks. That's when she saw him. Kane stood across the street, leaning against his patrol car, arms crossed, Stetson tipped low over his hard blue eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with a smirk that twisted her gut. Aisha's pulse kicked up, but she held, his gaze stepping onto the porch to show she wasn't rattled. "Got something to say, Sheriff?" she called, voice carrying over the quiet road. He chuckled, a low rumble, and tipped his hat, slow and mocking. "Just keeping an eye on trouble," he said, then slid into his car and peeled off, tires, spitting gravel. Aisha watched him go, unease prickling her skin. He wasn't shaken, not even close. She clenched her fists, the complaint's ink still fresh in her mind, and told herself this was progress. Kane knew she'd fight, and that had to count for something. Night fell heavy and humid, the cicadas screaming louder than ever as Aisha microwaved a bowl of chili and sat at Marcus's wobbly kitchen table, her phone buzzing with a text from Nadia. "Judge says complaints in the system, step 1. She exhaled, spooning chili into her mouth, the spices sharp on her tongue. She was halfway through the bowl when a crash shattered the silence, glass exploding somewhere out front. She dropped the spoon, heart slamming against her ribs, and bolted to the living room. The window by the door was gone. shards glittering on the hardwood, a brick lying in the wreckage. She crouched low, peering out, and saw the tail end of a pickup truck vanishing into the dark, its engine roaring. Her breath caught as she stood, eyes tracing the wall where red spray paint bled across the faded wallpaper, the word "Leave" scrawled in jagged letters, flanked by a racial slur so vile it made her stomach lurch. She grabbed her phone, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins, and snapped photos of the damage, the brick, the paint. Her mind raced, connecting the dots. Kane's smirk, his parting words, this attack. She stepped onto the porch, glass crunching under her boots, and scanned the street. Empty, silent, except for a faint glow 2 blocks down, headlights flickering, then cutting off. Kane's patrol car idling in the shadows, its engine a low growl she could feel in her chest. He didn't move, didn't approach, just sat there, a specter watching her unravel. Aisha's fists balled tight, nails digging into her palms as the realization hit hard. The complaint hadn't scared him, it had provoked him. This wasn't a retreat, it was a declaration, a promise of worse to come. She dialed Nadia, voice low and urgent as she paced the porch, the humid air clinging to her skin. They hit the house, brick through the window, slurs on the wall, Kane's watching from the street. Nadia swore, her tone shifting from triumph to alarm. "That's retaliation, Aisha. He's escalating because you pushed back." Aisha nodded, though Nadia couldn't see it, her eyes locked on the patrol car's silhouette. "He's not stopping," she said, voice hardening. "Neither am I." She hung up, grabbed a broom from the kitchen and started sweeping the glass, each scrape fueling her resolve. The complaint was supposed to be her weapon, a legal jab to knock Kane off balance, but it had backfired, lighting a fuse she hadn't seen coming. She'd thought she'd scored a win, a small crack in his armor, but now the house felt like a target, Pine Hollow a battlefield. Kane's car finally rolled away, taillights fading into the night, leaving her standing in the wreckage, broom in hand, knowing this was only the beginning. Aisha Hammond woke to the faint hum of cicadas outside Marcus's house, the morning sun slicing through the boarded-up window she'd patched after Sheriff Luther Kane's midnight attack. Glass crumbs still glittered in the corners of the living room, a jagged reminder of the brick and slurs that had shattered her sense of safety. She'd swept most of it up, but the red paint on the wall glared back, leave a bleeding scar she couldn't scrub away. At 59, she'd seen combat zones less hostile than Pine Hollow, but this was personal now, a war she hadn't signed up for. She brewed coffee in Marcus's old pot, the bitter aroma steadying her nerves, and replayed the night before. Kane's patrol car idling in the dark, his smirk a silent vow to break her. She wasn't running, not yet. She'd faced worse odds and walked away with medals, not scars. Today she'd fight smarter, not harder. She grabbed her phone, dialed Jamal Porter, the mechanic who'd warned her about Kane, and set up a meet at his shop. She needed an ally, and he'd already proven he saw through the sheriff's game. By 9, she was at the hardware store in town, a cramped space smelling of sawdust and oil, picking up security cameras to catch Kane's next move. The clerk, a balding white man with a tobacco-stained beard, rang her up without a word, his eyes flicking to her face then away, a quiet disdain she'd grown used to here. She paid cash, $32 and change, and hauled the gear back to the SUV, her steps quick but deliberate. Back at the house, she spent 2 hours mounting the cameras, one above the front door, another by the garage, their lenses glinting, like sentinels. She synced them to her phone, testing the feed, and smiled as grainy footage of the oak-lined street blinked to life. If Kane's boys came back, she'd have proof, something concrete to shove in his face. She texted Nadia Price, her attorney friend, attaching a still of the empty porch. "Setting up defenses, next bricks on tape." Nadia replied fast, "Smart, I'm digging into Kane's dirt, stay sharp." Aisha felt the tide shifting, a flicker of control in this mess. She wasn't just a target now, she was a hunter. That afternoon, she met Jamal at his garage, a cinder-block building on the edge of Pine Hollow, its bay doors open to the sticky heat. He wiped grease from his hands, his lean frame hunched over a rusted Chevy, and nodded her inside. "Heard about the window," he said, voice low, eyes scanning the street. "Kane's pissed you didn't fold." Aisha leaned against a workbench, crossing her arms. He'll have to try harder than a brick. Jamal chuckled, but it faded. Quick? He will. Folks around here, the black ones anyway, we've seen him do worse. You're stirring a hornet's nest. She nodded, grateful for his candor, and told him about the cameras. He offered to store backups of the footage just in case, and she agreed, feeling a fragile alliance take root. Other black residents trickled in, a barber named Ty and a nurse called Lena. Their voices hushed as they shared stories of Kane's wrath, fines that drained savings, arrests that broke families. They were scared, but her defiance sparked something. In their eyes, a quiet hope she hadn't expected. She drove back at dusk, the sky bruising purple, her chest lighter with every mile. The cameras were up. Jamal had her back and Nadia was building a case. She'd caught Kane off guard with the complaint, and now she was arming herself with evidence. Maybe Pine Hollow wasn't lost yet. She parked in the driveway, grabbed a cold soda from the fridge, and sank into Marcus's armchair, the fizz sharp on her tongue. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the county tax office, and she opened it, expecting routine estate paperwork. Instead, her blood ran cold. An eviction notice, bold and official, claimed Marcus owed $8,000 in back taxes, a debt she knew was fiction. She'd seen his records, paid up through the year, stamped and filed. This was a lie, a legal gut punch with Kane's fingerprints all over it. She grabbed her keys, fury propelling her out the door, and drove to the tax office, a squat brick building downtown, its lights dim but still on. Inside, she slapped the notice on the counter, facing a clerk with watery eyes and a nervous tick. "This is fraud," Aisha said, voice cutting like a blade. "My brother's taxes were clear. Explain it." The clerk, a white woman in her 50s named Pam, stammered, flipping through a ledger with shaky hands. "It's in the system, ma'am, says it's delinquent." Aisha leaned in, her shadow swallowing the desk. "Check again. I've got receipts." Pam fumbled, pulling up a screen, and after 10 minutes of scrolling, her face paled. "This got entered yesterday. No audit trail. I don't know how—" She trailed off, glancing at the door like she expected Kane to barge in. Aisha pressed harder. "Who entered it?" Pam swallowed, voice dropping to a whisper. "Sheriff Kane called it in. Said it was urgent." Aisha's jaw tightened, victory surging through her veins. She'd caught him red-handed, a paper trail tying him to this scam. "Print that screen," she ordered, and Pam obeyed, handing over a trembling sheet of proof. She walked out, the paper clutched tight, her pulse pounding with triumph. She dodged the eviction, exposed Kane's dirty trick, and had hard evidence to bury him. Back home, she locked the printout in Marcus's old safe, a steel box bolted to the closet floor, and texted Nadia, "Tax fraud nailed." Kane slipping. She cracked open another soda, savoring the win, when her phone chirped, the camera feed lighting up. She tapped it, expecting a stray cat or a gust of wind, but froze. Deputy Boyd, his wiry frame unmistakable, stood in her driveway, slashing her SUV's tires with a pocket knife, the rubber hissing as it deflated. She bolted to the window, heart slamming, and saw Travis join him, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. They didn't stop there. Boyd kicked in the garage door, and Travis hurled a rock through the kitchen window, glass exploding inward. Aisha grabbed her phone, recording live, her breath shallow as they rummaged inside. The feed cut out, a glitch or sabotage, and she dialed 911, voice steady despite the chaos. "Intruders at my house, deputies involved, send help." The dispatcher, a bored-sounding woman, mumbled something about a unit en route, but Aisha knew better than to trust it. She hid the safe key under a floorboard, grabbed a kitchen knife for defense, and waited, every creak of the house amplifying her rage. Then, headlights flooded the street, Kane's patrol car screeching to a halt. He stormed in with Boyd and Travis, a forged warrant flapping in his hand, and they tore the place apart, upending furniture, ripping cushions, smashing Marcus's old radio. Travis emerged from the bedroom, holding a baggie of white powder, grinning like a jackal. "Well, well, General, looks like we got a drug bust," Kane drawled, his voice dripping with malice. Aisha stepped forward, knife still in hand, eyes blazing. That's not mine, and you know it. Kane laughed, a guttural sound that chilled her spine. Don't matter what I know, matters what I say. Boyd snatched the knife from her grip, twisting her arm until she grunted, and Travis cuffed her again, tighter than before, the metal cutting into her wrists. They dragged her outside, neighbors peering from curtains, whispering as Kane's deputies tossed the drugs into evidence bags. Aisha's mind reeled, the tax win evaporating under this brutal counterstrike. She'd thought she'd gained ground, but Kane had rigged the game, planting felony evidence to bury her deeper than a brick ever could. They shoved her into the patrol car, the door slamming shut, and Kane leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. "Told you I'd put you down," he hissed, then slammed the window shut, leaving her cuffed and fuming as the engine roared to life. Was Aisha naive to think cameras could stop a monster like Kane, or did she have no choice but to fight fire? With fire? Comment number 1 if you think she's still got a shot to turn this around. Like and subscribe if you're hooked on her battle against this corrupt kingpin, because the stakes are climbing fast. Can she claw her way out of this drug frame-up? Or has Kane just locked her in a cage she can't escape? Aisha Hammond sat rigid in the back of Sheriff Luther Kane's patrol car, the cuffs digging into her wrists like steel teeth, the plastic seat slick with sweat and grime. The planted drugs, a baggie of white powder waved in her face by Deputy Travis, burned in her mind as the vehicle rolled through Pine Hollow's dark streets, headlights carving a path through the humid Tennessee night. She'd been arrested again, this time on a felony charge that could shred her life, her 30-year military career reduced to a smuggler's rap sheet. The station loomed ahead, a squat brick fortress glowing under flickering sodium lights, and her pulse hammered, not from fear but from a fury so deep it felt like fire in her veins. Kane's deputies, Boyd and Travis, hauled her out, their grips bruising her arms as they marched her inside, the linoleum floor squeaking under their boots. She kept her head high, eyes locked forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. They shoved her into the same cell she'd left just a day ago, 8 feet by 10, the metal bench cold against her legs as the bars clanged shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Kane strode in minutes later, his massive frame filling. The doorway Stetson tipped back to reveal a smirk that twisted her gut. He leaned against the bars, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling up to the stained ceiling. "Well, General," he drawled, the title dripping with mockery. "Looks like you're settling in real nice. Drugs'll keep you here a while." Aisha stood, stepping close to the bars, her voice low and razor-sharp. "You planted that?" "Kane, we both know it's a lie." He exhaled a plume of smoke into her face, laughing, a harsh bark that rattled the cell. "What I know don't matter, girl. What sticks does. And this?" He tapped an imaginary badge on his chest. "This says you're done." She didn't flinch, her gaze boring into his hard blue eyes. "I'm a retired Lieutenant General, U.S. Army. 30 years of service. You think this holds up?" He leaned in, so close she could smell the tobacco and sweat on him, and spat on the floor near her boots. "Service don't mean squat here. I'll bury you so deep even your fancy lawyer won't dig you out." He turned and stalked out, leaving her alone with the hum of the overhead light and the weight of his threat. She sat, flexing her cuffed hands, the metal biting deeper, and let her mind shift to strategy. Nadia Price, her attorney, would fight this, she knew it. The drugs had no chain of custody, no prints, just Kane's word against hers. She'd beaten flimsier setups in military courts, outsmarted brass with bigger egos. She closed her eyes, breathing slow, channeling the chaos into focus. Hours crawled by, the night stretching into a grey dawn when the cell door clanked open again. Boyd stepped in, tossing her a paper slip. "Bail's posted," he grunted, unlocking the cuffs with a sneer. "Don't get comfy out there." Aisha rubbed her wrists red and raw and walked out, her boots steady on the sticky floor, knowing this wasn't mercy, just a pause. Nadia waited in the parking lot, her silver sedan idling under the morning haze, her face tight with controlled anger. "Judge threw it out," she said as Aisha slid into the passenger seat, handing her a bottle of water. "No evidence trail, just like last time. Kane's sloppy when he's mad." Aisha cracked the cap, gulping the cold liquid, her throat parched from the cell's dry air. "He's not sloppy. "He's desperate," she said, voice hoarse but firm. "He'll hit harder now." Nadia nodded, pulling out of the lot, but Aisha's eyes caught something across the street, a crowd, gathering near the station's exit. White locals, 20 or 30 strong, clustered around her SUV, its hood engulfed in flames, tires melting into black puddles. Shouts rose over the crackle of fire, "Go home!" And worse, slurs slicing through the air like shrapnel. Aisha's stomach lurched, her hands curling into fists as Nadia swore under her breath. "They torched it," Nadia said, slamming the brakes. "Kane's work." Aisha stepped out, the heat from the blaze washing over her. The crowd's jeers a wall of noise. Men in flannel shirts and trucker hats pumped fists. Women with pinched faces clapped. Kids darted around laughing like it was a bonfire party. She spotted Boyd and Travis in the mix, not in uniform but smirking, their hands suspiciously clean of soot. Kane stood at the edge, arms crossed, watching the chaos with a grin that said he'd lit the match himself. Aisha's chest tightened, her victory over the drug charge dissolving in the smoke. She'd walked out free, thought she'd dodged his bullet, but this was his answer, a public gutting of her dignity. Nadia grabbed her arm, pulling her back to the sedan. "We're leaving. Now." Aisha shook her off, striding toward Kane, her boots crunching gravel, fury propelling her past the crowd's taunts. "This your idea of law, Sheriff?" she shouted, voice cutting through the din. He didn't flinch, just tipped his hat, slow and mocking. "Looks like folks don't want you here, General. Can't control what they do." She was 10 feet from him when the first shot rang out, a crack that split the air, the crowd scattering like roaches. Aisha ducked instinctively, years of combat training snapping her low, her eyes scanning for the source. Another shot followed, a bullet whizzing past her ear, pinging off the station wall. She rolled behind a parked truck, heart slamming as Nadia screamed her name from the sedan. Kane's deputies, Boyd and Travis, peeled out in their own pickup, tires squealing, firing 2 more rounds into the sky as they sped off, their laughter echoing over the chaos. The crowd thinned, panic, replacing their cheers, leaving Aisha crouched in the dust, her SUV a smoldering husk, Kane still standing there, unmoved. He didn't draw his gun, didn't need to, his point made in fire and lead. She rose, brushing dirt from her knees, her eyes locked on him as he climbed into his patrol car and drove off, leaving her stranded. Nadia ran to her, face pale, hands shaking as she gripped Aisha's shoulders. "You okay? Jesus, they shot at you." Aisha nodded, breath ragged, adrenaline still pumping. "Warning shots, they're scared." But her voice wavered, the lie thin even to her ears. This wasn't fear, it was rage. Kane's fury unbound after she'd slipped his drug trap. She'd thought release was a win, a crack in his armor, but he'd turned the town into his weapon, torching her car, inciting a mob, sending bullets to seal the deal. Nadia dragged her to the sedan, slamming the door as they peeled out, the burning wreckage shrinking in the rearview mirror. "He's losing it," Nadia said, knuckles white on the wheel. "We need to get you out of here." Aisha shook her head, staring out the window as Pine Hollow blurred past. "Not yet. He wants me gone. I'm staying." They reached Marcus's house, the boarded window and slashed tires a grim welcome, and Nadia parked, turning to her with a look that begged reason. "Aisha, they're shooting now. This isn't a game." Aisha stepped out, the humid air thick against her skin, and scanned the street. Kane's patrol car rolled by, slow and deliberate, 2 blocks down, its headlights off, but its presence, a knife in her gut. "It's not a game," she said, voice hardening. "It's a war." She walked inside, Nadia following, and locked the door, her mind racing. The cell, the drugs, the fire, the shots, each blow heavier than the last. Kane's grip tightening around her throat. She'd slipped his grasp twice, but freedom was an illusion here. The town was his, the locals his dogs, and they'd turned on her with teeth bared. She sank into Marcus's armchair, the cushions sagging under her weight, and stared at the painted slur on the wall. She'd thought she could outlast him, outsmart him, but now she was cornered, a prey animal in a trap she'd underestimated. Kane wasn't stopping. He was escalating, and she had to find a way to hit back before he finished her for good. Aisha Hammond stood in Marcus's living room, the faint smell of smoke from her torched SUV still clinging to her clothes, the boarded-up window casting slanted shadows across the hardwood floor. The morning after Sheriff Luther Kane's mob had turned her car into a bonfire and fired warning shots past her head, Pine Hollow's humid air felt thicker, pressing against her skin like a noose tightening. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the crowd's jeers, the crack of gunfire, Kane's smug grin as he watched it all unfold. At 59, with decades of military discipline etched into her bones, she'd faced chaos before. But this was a different beast, raw and racial. A town turned weapon against her. She brewed coffee, the gurgle of the pot a thin thread of normalcy, and gripped her phone, texting Nadia Price. "They burned my car, shot at me. Kane's unhinged." Nadia's reply came fast. "I'm calling the state police. Stay put." But Aisha wasn't waiting for rescue. She'd survived worse, and she'd damn well fight this. She grabbed Marcus's old laptop, its keys sticky from years of neglect, and drafted an email to a news station in Memphis, 2 hours west of this Tennessee hellhole. She attached the camera footage of Boyd slashing her tires, the audio of Kane's threats from the first stop, and a shaky clip she'd snagged of the mob torching her SUV, the flames licking high as locals cheered. She typed fast, her words sharp. "Sheriff Luther Kane is terrorizing Pine Hollow. I'm a retired Army general and he's framing me, attacking me because I'm black and I won't bow. This is corruption, racism, and violence unchecked." She hit send, her pulse steadying as the confirmation pinged back. Exposure was her weapon now, a spotlight to burn Kane's shadow empire. She leaned back in the creaky chair, sipping coffee that tasted like ash, and felt a surge of triumph. The truth was out, and it had hit harder than any brick through her window. By noon, the story broke, the Memphis station blasting it across their noon broadcast. Aisha watched on her phone, the anchor's voice cutting through static. "A retired Army general accuses Pine Hollow Sheriff Luther Kane of racial harassment and corruption, backed by chilling footage. Clips rolled, Boyd's knife slicing rubber, flames swallowing her SUV, Kane's silhouette looming in the chaos." Social media erupted. Hashtags like "Justice for Aisha" trending in hours. Protesters poured into Pine Hollow by late afternoon. 50 strong, then 100 black and white faces from Memphis and beyond, clogging Main Street with signs, "End police terror. Kane must go." Aisha stepped onto the porch, heart pounding as chants echoed through the oaks. No justice, no peace. She'd cracked Kane's armor, turned his town into a battleground, and it felt like victory, real and raw. Mayor Clara Dunn, a wiry woman, in her 50s with gray-streaked hair, appeared on the courthouse steps, flanked by a nervous aide, her voice trembling but firm over a megaphone. "We've seen the footage. I'm ordering an immediate inquiry into Sheriff Kane's actions. This stops now." Aisha watched from across the street, hidden in the crowd, her chest swelling with hope. The mayor's words were a lifeline, proof the system could bend even here. Protesters cheered, horns blared, and Aisha texted Nadia, "It's working." "Enquiries on," Nadia shot back. "State police en route, hold tight." Aisha slipped back to Marcus's house, the chants fading behind her, and sank into the armchair, exhaustion warring with elation. She'd gone public, rallied a movement, and forced the town's hand. Kane was cornered, his reign teetering. She closed her eyes, letting herself believe it just for a moment. Dusk settled, the sky bleeding orange over Pine Hollow, when the first crash jolted her awake. A brick smashed through the side window, glass raining onto the couch, and Aisha dove low, instincts kicking in as shouts erupted outside. She crawled to the door, peering through the crack, and saw them, a mob of white locals, 30 or 40 strong, spilling onto the lawn. Men in flannel and ball caps, women with twisted faces all screaming, "Get out, nigger, and Kane's town, not yours." Her stomach lurched, bile rising as she grabbed her phone, hitting record. Rocks pelted the house, thudding against the walls, shattering the garage window, and she ducked as a bottle sailed through the broken pane, shattering on the floor. The air thickened with rage, a feral energy she'd last felt in war zones, not sleepy Tennessee streets. She dialed Nadia, breath shallow as the mob's roar grew louder. "They're attacking the house," she whispered, voice tight. "Dozens of them." Nadia's reply was frantic. "State police are 20 minutes out. Barricade yourself." Aisha hung up, shoving the couch against the door, her arms straining as she dragged Marcus's old dresser to block the hallway. Her heart slammed against her ribs, every crash outside a hammer blow to her resolve. She'd thought the news would break Kane, not unleash this. A man's voice bellowed, "Burn her out," and her blood froze. She smelled it before she saw it, gasoline, sharp and acrid, seeping through the cracks. A match flared in the dusk, and flames erupted at the porch, licking up the dry wood with a hungry crackle. Smoke stung her eyes, heat blasting her face as she stumbled back, coughing, the room filling with a grey haze. She grabbed a towel from the kitchen, soaking it in the sink, and pressed it to her mouth, her mind racing for an exit. The front was gone, fire chewing through the door, and the side windows glowed orange with the blaze. She bolted to the bedroom, smashing the back window with a lamp, glass splintering outward as she climbed through, jagged edges snagging her shirt. She hit the ground hard, rolling into the overgrown grass, smoke choking her lungs as the mob's shouts circled the house. "She's done," someone yelled, triumphant, and Aisha crawled behind the shed, her hands trembling, but her resolve steel. The house burned, flames clawing the roof, Marcus's life reduced to ash, and she watched hidden as Kane's pickup idled at the street's end, his silhouette motionless, watching his handiwork unfold. She'd thought victory was hers, the news a knockout punch, but Kane had flipped it, turned the town into a lynch mob, fire his brutal reply. Her phone buzzed, Nadia's voice crackling through. "Where are you? Police are close." Aisha rasped. "Backyard hiding. House is gone." Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing, and the mob scattered, shadows fleeing into the oaks as headlights pierced the smoke. Aisha stayed low, the shed's splintered wood digging into her palms, her victory torched to cinders. Kane's truck rolled away, slow and deliberate, leaving her in the wreckage, alive but battered, the war escalating beyond anything she'd imagined. She'd pushed him, exposed him, and he'd answered with flames, proving his grip was tighter, his wrath deadlier than she'd ever feared. Did Aisha underestimate Kane's hold on Pine Hollow, or was going public her only shot at justice? Comment number 1 if you think she's still got fight left after this inferno. Like and subscribe if you're gripped by her battle against a town-turned-executioner, because this story's blazing hotter than ever. Can she rise from these ashes and strike back, or has Kane just burned her last hope to the ground? Aisha Hammond crouched behind the splintered shed in Marcus's backyard, the heat from the burning house scorching her face, smoke clawing at her lungs as flames devoured the porch where she'd sipped tea just days ago. The mob's shouts faded. Into the Tennessee night, their gasoline-soaked vengeance leaving her brother's home a roaring inferno. At 59, she'd survived ambushes in deserts and jungles, but this, Pine Hollow's raw hatred unleashed by Sheriff Luther Kane, cut deeper than any bullet. Her hands shook, not from fear but fury, as she clutched her phone, its screen, cracked from her scramble through the window. Sirens wailed closer, state police finally cutting through the chaos, their red and blue lights flickering through the oaks. She stayed low, the grass damp against her knees, until a familiar voice broke the haze. "Aisha!" Jamal Porter, the mechanic who'd warned her about Kane, sprinted from the alley, his lean frame silhouetted against the fire. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet, his eyes wide with panic. "Come on, we gotta move." She stumbled after, him coughing into her sleeve, the acrid stench of burning wood and gasoline choking her throat. Jamal led her through a maze of backyards, past rusted swings and overgrown fences, until they reached his garage 2 blocks away, its cinderblock walls a fortress in the dark. He shoved the side door open, ushering her inside, and locked it. Behind them, his breath ragged as he leaned against the frame. "Saw the fire from my place," he said, voice tight. "Knew it was Kane's doing." Aisha sank onto a stool by the workbench, her shirt torn, her hands scraped raw from the fall. The garage smelled of oil and metal, a sharp contrast to the smoke still clinging to her skin. They burned it all, she rasped, her voice hoarse. Mob came right after the news hit. Jamal nodded, grabbing a water bottle from a mini fridge and tossing it to her. He's sending a message. You hit him, he hits back harder. She gulped the water, the cold stinging her throat, and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her mind raced, piecing together a plan. The news had rallied protesters, forced an inquiry, but Kane had turned it against her, sicking the town like rabid dogs. She couldn't stay here, exposed, but running wasn't an option either. She pulled out her phone, the battery at 10%, and dialed Malik Stone, a retired colonel she'd served with in Iraq, his gruff voice a lifeline in her ear. Aisha, what the hell's going on? Saw you on the news. She didn't waste words. Kane burned my house, sent a mob. I need backup, military kind. Malik didn't hesitate. I've got contacts, feds included. Sit tight, I'm mobilizing. She hung up, her chest loosening just enough to breathe. Jamal watched her, his jaw tight. You're calling in the cavalry? She nodded, resolve hardening. Kane wants a war, he's getting one. They hid in the garage for hours, the night stretching thin as Aisha patched her cuts with a first aid kit Jamal dug from a drawer. She taped gauze over her palms, the sting sharpening her focus, and checked her phone as it charged on a frayed cord. Malik texted, Feds alerted, state police briefed, hold position. She showed Jamal, and he managed a grim smile. Might actually work. Kane's never faced heat like this. Aisha leaned back against the wall, the concrete cool through her shirt, and let herself hope. The news had shaken Pine Hollow, the protesters had rattled Kane, and now federal pressure loomed. She'd turned the tide, brought muscle he couldn't bully. She closed her eyes, exhaustion tugging at her, when a low rumble snapped them open, tires crunching gravel outside the garage. Jamal peeked through a grimy window, his face paling. Kane's boys, he whispered, ducking low. Aisha grabbed a tire iron from the workbench, her pulse spiking as headlights flooded the bay doors. Metal groaned as the doors buckled under a truck's ram, splintering inward, and 5 men spilled inside, Kane's deputies Boyd and Travis leading the pack, their civilian clothes swapped for black hoodies and snarls. Boyd swung a bat, smashing a toolbox to the floor, while Travis leveled a shotgun at Jamal. Where's the bitch? Travis barked, his scowl twisting his stocky face. Aisha stepped forward, tire iron raised, voice steady. Right here. You want me? Come get me. Boyd lunged, bat arcing toward her head, but she sidestepped. Years of hand-to-hand training kicking in, and cracked the iron across his knee. He howled, crumpling, but Travis fired, the blast deafening as buckshot shredded a stack of tires behind Jamal. Jamal dove, tackling Travis, the shotgun skittering across the concrete. But 2 more men grabbed him, fists pounding his ribs with wet thuds. Aisha swung again, catching a 3rd in the jaw, bone crunching under the blow, but the 4th, a hulking figure with a shaved head, tackled her, slamming her into the workbench. Pain exploded in her back, the air knocked from her lungs, and he pinned her arms, his breath hot with whiskey. Kane says hello, he growled, wrenching the tire iron free and tossing it aside. She kicked, aiming for his groin, but he twisted, slamming her face first onto the floor, her cheek splitting against the concrete. Blood pooled under her mouth, warm and coppery, as they dragged Jamal off Travis, his nose bloody, his eyes dazed. Boyd, limping, yanked Aisha up by her hair, her scalp screaming, and Travis kicked Jamal in the gut, leaving him gasping. They hauled her outside, the night air cool against her battered face, and threw her into a van, its interior stinking of mildew and rust. Jamal groaned beside her, curled fetal as the doors slammed shut. The engine roared, gravel spitting under tires, and Kane's voice cut through the dark from the driver's seat. Thought you'd run me out with your little news stunt? He laughed, a guttural sound that chilled her spine. You're done. General, nobody's coming for you now. Aisha spat blood onto the floor, her vision swimming but her mind sharp. Feds are already here, she lied, voice raw, testing him. He didn't bite, just kept driving, the van lurching over potholes. As Boyd and Travis muttered in the back, their glee palpable. She'd thought Malik's call would save her, that federal heat would scare Kane off, but he'd struck faster. harder, turning her refuge into a trap. The van stopped after 20 minutes, a jolt that slammed her against the wall, and they dragged her out, Jamal staggering beside her. They stood in a ditch off a deserted county road, the pines looming black against a moonless sky. Kane stepped forward, his Stetson casting a shadow over his hard blue eyes, and cracked her across the face with his fist, her head snapping back, stars bursting in her skull. "You don't belong here," he snarled, punching her again, her lip splitting wide. Jamal lunged, weak but defiant, and Travis clubbed him with the shotgun butt, a sickening crack as he collapsed, blood pooling under his head. Aisha fell to her knees, ribs screaming, and Kane loomed over her, his boot pressing her chest into the dirt. "Should have left when I told you," he said, then nodded to Boyd. They kicked her, boots slamming her sides, her arms, her legs, each blow a thunderclap of pain until she curled tight, gasping, blood soaking her shirt. They stopped, panting, and Kane spat on her, the wet glob hitting her cheek. "Leave her," he ordered, climbing back into the van. "She's finished." Boyd tossed a final kick, her vision fading as the engine roared to life, taillights shrinking into the dark. She lay there, broken in the ditch, the cold earth, seeping into her bones, Jamal motionless beside her. She'd thought she'd turned the tide, called in the cavalry, but Kane had ambushed her, beaten her to a pulp, left her for dead. Her phone was gone, smashed in the garage, and the feds were nowhere in sight. Pain pulsed through her, but fury burned brighter, an ember refusing to die. She'd survived worse, she told herself, dragging herself an inch, then another, toward the road. Kane thought he'd won, but she wasn't done, not yet. The war wasn't over, it was just getting bloodier. Aisha Hammond lay battered in the ditch off a deserted Pine Hollow County road, the cold Tennessee dirt soaking into her bloodied shirt, her ribs throbbing with every shallow breath. Sheriff Luther Kane's ambush had left her broken, his deputies, boots carving bruises into her flesh, her face swollen from his fists. Jamal Porter, her ally, sprawled motionless beside her, his head a dark puddle against the earth, the shotgun blow that felled him echoing in her skull. At 59, she'd survived wars, but this felt like death's edge, the night pressing down heavy and silent after Kane's van roared away. Her vision blurred, pain lancing through her, but her mind clung to one truth: she wasn't finished. She gritted her teeth, dragging herself inch by inch toward the road, her nails clawing mud, every move a defiance of Kane's smug, "She's done." Headlights sliced through the dark, a truck's rumble shaking the ground, and she froze, fearing Kane's return. But it was a grizzled white trucker, his rig screeching to a halt as he leapt out, his gravelly voice cutting the silence. "Holy hell, lady, you alive?" She rasped a yes, her throat raw, and he hauled her up, his calloused hands gentle despite his bulk. "Found another one back there," he said, nodding to Jamal, who groaned faintly, alive but battered. He loaded them into the cab, Aisha slumping against the seat. Jamal slumped beside her and gunned it to a motel 10 miles out, a neon-lit dive called the Rusty Anchor. The trucker, Earl, carried her inside, his flannel straining as he kicked open a room door and laid her on a lumpy bed. "I'll get help," he muttered, dialing 911 from the lobby, while Aisha fumbled for her cracked phone, its screen flickering, but functional. She texted Malik Stone, her retired colonel friend, "Ambushed alive motel off Route 17. Earl returned with a wet rag, pressing it to her split lip, and Jamal stirred, coughing blood onto the faded carpet. "Kane?" he wheezed, eyes fluttering. Aisha nodded, pain sharpening her resolve. "He's not done, neither am I." Malik's reply buzzed seconds later. "Feds inbound. Hold on." Earl patched them up with a first aid kit from his truck, bandaging Aisha's cuts, taping Jamal's ribs, his hands steady despite his muttered curses about damn redneck sheriffs. Aisha sat up, wincing, the motel's stale air grounding her as she dialed Nadia Price, her voice a rasp over the line. "Kane's crew jumped us, beat us half dead, left us in a ditch." Nadia swore, her tone fierce. "State police found..." The house burned. "Feds are rolling in now, thanks to Malik. You're safe?" Aisha glanced at Jamal, his breathing shallow but steady, and lied, "Safe enough." She hung up, sipping water Earl brought, the cold stinging her cracked lips. She'd survived Kane's wrath and help was coming. Her chest loosened, a flicker of triumph sparking through the pain. By dawn, the motel room glowed with grey light, the hum of traffic outside a lifeline after the night's silence. Aisha hobbled to the bathroom, splashing water on her swollen face, the mirror reflecting a warrior bruised but unbowed. She'd called in the feds, turned Kane's ambush into her resurrection, and now she'd bury him. She emailed the Memphis news station again from Jamal's phone, her own battery dead, attaching a voice memo she'd recorded mid-beating. Kane's snarl clear. "You're done, General," she typed. "Sheriff Kane tried to kill me. Here's proof." The story hit national airwaves by noon, CNN picking it up. The anchor's voice grave. "Retired Army General Aisha Hammond survives brutal attack by Sheriff Luther Kane's deputies, audio evidence sparking outrage." Protests swelled, not just in Pine Hollow but statewide. Thousands marching, hashtags like Aisha lives drowning out Kane's name. Aisha watched from the motel bed, Jamal propped beside her, a faint smile tugging her bloodied lip. "They're coming for him," she said, voice hoarse but firm. FBI vans rolled into Pine Hollow that afternoon, sirens blaring as agents raided Kane's station, cuffing Boyd and Travis in front of a stunned crowd. Aisha saw it on the TV, grainy, footage of deputies hauled out, Kane's office trashed as files spilled onto the lawn. Malik called, his gruff voice crackling with triumph. "They've got warrants for Kane too. He's on the run, but not for long." Aisha exhaled, her bruised ribs aching, and felt victory bloom real and heavy. She'd survived, exposed him, and the feds were dismantling his empire. Jamal squeezed her hand, his grip weak but alive. "You did it," he rasped. She nodded, leaning back, the motel's thin pillows a throne after the ditch. She'd turned. Kane's knockout blow into her comeback, and the world was watching him fall. Then dusk brought a new storm. The TV flickered to a live press conference, Kane stepping up to a podium in a borrowed suit, his Stetson gone, his face flushed but defiant. Aisha sat up, pain shooting through her, as his voice boomed through the speakers. "General Hammond's a fraud," he declared, eyes glinting with malice. "She's a drug lord, staged this attack to smear me. I've got proof." He held up grainy photos, Aisha's SUV with bags of powder, doctored clips of her threatening deputies, a masterful lie spun from thin air. The anchor cut in, skeptical, but Pine Hollow's locals roared on screen, a militia forming in the streets, rifles gleaming under streetlights. "Protect our sheriff," they chanted, 100 strong white faces twisted with rage. Aisha's stomach dropped, her triumph curdling as Jamal swore beside her. "He's flipping it," he said, voice trembling. Her phone buzzed. Nadia's, name flashing. "He's gone rogue," Nadia said, breathless. "That press stunt's a Hail Mary, but the town's buying it. Militia's hunting you." Aisha gripped the bed frame, her bruised knuckles whitening, as the TV showed Kane rallying his mob, promising to cleanse Pine Hollow of outsiders like her. The feds had his deputies, but he'd turned the narrative, painted her as the villain, and armed his loyalists. She'd thought she'd won, survived his beating, brought justice crashing down, but Kane had countered with a lie so bold it rewrote reality. The motel's walls closed in, the hum of traffic now a threat, every headlight a potential hunter. She'd risen from the ditch, but now she was prey again, Kane's wrath metastasizing into a town-wide manhunt. She looked at Jamal, his eyes wide with fear, and knew they couldn't stay. "We move," she said, voice steel despite the pain. "He's not done and I'm not running." Earl burst in, his trucker's bulk filling the doorway, face pale. "Heard on the CB, militia's sweeping the roads. We gotta go now." Aisha stood wincing, her body screaming but her will unyielding. She'd survived Kane's fists, crawled from his trap, and now faced his army. The feds were close, but Kane was closer. His lie a wildfire she hadn't seen coming. She grabbed Jamal's arm, pulling him up, and followed Earl to his rig, the night swallowing them as the engine roared to life. Pine Hollow's rage a shadow on their heels. Did Aisha push Kane too far by going national, or was this her only way to fight his tyranny? Comment number 1 if you think she's still got a chance to outlast this twisted counterattack. Like and subscribe if you're riveted by her grit against a town gone mad, because this war's exploding beyond control. Has Kane's desperate lie sealed her fate, or can she turn his own chaos against him before the militia closes in? Taisha Hammond crouched in the back of Earl's rattling truck cab, her bruised body aching against the worn leather seat, the hum of the engine vibrating through her bones as they sped away from the Rusty Anchor Motel. Jamal Porter slumped beside her, his breath shallow, his ribs taped from Sheriff Luther Kane's brutal ambush the night before. The Tennessee darkness pressed against the windows, headlights carving a narrow path through the pines, but every shadow felt like a threat. Kane's militia hunting them after his press conference, lie turned Pine Hollow into a war zone. Urdu gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his grizzled face tight with focus. "They're sweeping the roads," he muttered, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Heard it on the CB, armed to the teeth." Aisha nodded, her split lip throbbing, her mind racing despite the pain. She'd survived the ditch, rallied the feds, but Kane's smear campaign, branding her a drug lord, had flipped her victory into a death sentence. She needed a lifeline. Earl pulled off Route 17 into a dirt lane, the truck bouncing over ruts until they reached a ramshackle cabin, its tin roof glinting under a sliver of moon. "Safe house," he said, killing the engine. "Belongs to a buddy off the grid." Aisha helped Jamal out, his weight heavy on her shoulder, and they staggered inside, the air thick with dust and pine sap. The cabin was sparse, a cot, a table, a wood stove, but it was shelter. Earl locked the door, shoving a chair under the knob, and Aisha sank onto the cot, her bruised ribs screaming as she dialed Malik Stone from Jamal's phone, her own smashed in the garage fight. "We're holed up," she rasped, voice raw. "Militia's after us, feds close?" Malik's gruff voice crackled through. "They've got Boyd and Travis in custody, warrants out for Kane. Stay low, they're sweeping the county." She exhaled, a flicker of hope sparking. The feds were closing in, Kane's empire cracking. "Tell them Route 17, old cabin," she said, and hung up, glancing at Jamal. "We hold here." Jamal managed a weak nod, easing onto a chair, his face pale but his eyes sharp. "You think they'll get him?" he asked, clutching his side. Aisha leaned against the wall, the rough wood cool through her torn shirt. "They've got his boys. He's running out of moves." She believed it, felt it, the tide turning after his botched attempt to kill her. She'd survived, exposed him, and now justice was clawing its way to Pine Hollow. Earl rigged a radio from his truck, static hissing until a news station broke. Through, the anchor's voice tense. "FBI arrests 2 deputies in Pine Hollow corruption probe. Sheriff Luther Kane wanted for assault and conspiracy." Aisha's chest loosened, a grim smile tugging her cracked lip. "See? He's crumbling." Jamal chuckled, a dry sound, and she let herself relax, the cot's springs creaking under her weight. They'd made it through the night, and Kane was on the ropes. Malik called an hour later, dawn painting the cabin's windows gray. Feds raided his house, got evidence logs, forged warrants. "Arrest warrants live. You're clear to testify." Aisha stood, wincing, and patched into a video call from the safe house's shaky Wi-Fi, her bruised face filling the screen as an agent recorded her statement. She detailed Kane's stops, the planted knife, the drugs, the fire, the beating. Her voice steady despite the pain, every word a nail in his coffin. "He tried to kill me," she finished, "because I wouldn't bow." The agent nodded, ending the call, and Malik texted, "Warrants issued. He's done." Aisha sank back, exhaustion blurring her edges, and shared a look with Jamal. "We got him," she said, voice soft but triumphant. They celebrated with stale coffee Earl brewed on the stove, the bitter taste of victory sip as sirens wailed faintly in the distance, closing in on Kane. She'd turned the tables, survived his worst, and now he'd fall. The cabin felt like a bunker, a stronghold against his chaos, and she let herself believe it was over, the noose tightening around his neck instead of hers. Then the radio crackled, a local station cutting in. "Breaking news. Armed militia. Storms Pine Hollow outskirts, demanding Sheriff Kane's release." Aisha froze, coffee spilling onto her hand. The burn ignored as footage flickered on Jamal's phone, pulled up from a live stream. Men in camo, rifles slung over shoulders, smashed windows at the sheriff's station, their shouts a wall of noise. "Free Kane, hang the outsider!" Her stomach dropped, victory souring as she recognized faces from the mob that burned her house, now armed and feral. Headlights stabbed through the cabin's windows, tires screeching outside, and Aisha dove for cover, pulling Jamal down as the door exploded inward, wood splintering under a shotgun blast. 6 militiamen stormed in, boots pounding the floor. Rifles raised, their leader a gaunt figure with a scar across his cheek bellowing, "Where's the bitch?" Earl lunged for his tire iron, but a rifle butt cracked his skull, dropping him limp beside the stove. Aisha scrambled for a kitchen knife, her bruised body screaming, but they were on her fast, a fist slamming her jaw, stars bursting in her skull. Jamal fought, swinging a chair that shattered across a man's back, but a gunshot roared, blood spraying as he collapsed, a bullet tearing through his chest. "No!" Aisha screamed, lunging for him, but arms pinned her, wrenching her back, the knife clattering away. They dragged her outside, Jamal's blood soaking the floor, his eyes glazing as life drained out. She kicked, clawed, her voice raw with rage. But they threw her into a pickup, the bed rattling as they sped off, Pine Hollow's pines blurring past. The scarred leader leaned over her, rifle barrel pressed to her temple, his breath sour with chew. "Kane sends his regards," he snarled, zip-tying her wrists, the plastic cutting into her swollen skin. The truck lurched onto a gravel road, stopping at an abandoned mill, its rusted silos looming like tombstones in the dawn light. They hauled her inside, the air thick with mold and rot, and Kane emerged from the shadows, his Stetson back on, his face flushed with wild triumph. "Thought you'd bury me, General," he spat, his fist cracking her cheek, blood pooling in her mouth. "Feds can't touch me here." He beat her, methodical and vicious, his knuckles splitting her brow, her nose, her ribs cracking under, his boots as she curled on the concrete, gasping through the pain. "Town's mine," he growled, kicking her again, her vision swimming. "You're nothing." She spat blood, defiant even as her body failed, and he loomed over her, wiping, his hands on his pants. "Gonna frame this as suicide," he said, nodding to the scarred man. Outsider couldn't take the heat off herself. Perfect. They tied her to a chair, her wrists bleeding under the ties, and Kane pulled a revolver, spinning the chamber, with a grin. "Say night-night," he mocked, pressing it to her head. She'd thought she'd won, the feds her checkmate, but Jamal was dead. The militia had her and Kane's trap had snapped shut, her victory a mirage swallowed by his brutality. Her mind raced, pain blurring her edges, but she glared up at him, voice a rasp. "You're finished, Kane, they'll find me." He laughed, a guttural roar, and cocked the hammer, the click deafening in the mill's silence. She braced, every bruise a testament to her fight, knowing she'd pushed him this far, broken his world even if it cost her everything. The noose was hers now, but she'd dragged him into the fire first. Aisha Hammond sat bound to a rusted chair in the abandoned mill, her wrists bleeding under the zip ties, the cold concrete biting into her bruised legs as Sheriff Luther Kane loomed over her, his revolver pressed to her temple. The air stank of mold and her own blood, her face swollen from his fists, her ribs cracked from his boots, every breath a knife in her chest. At 59, she'd survived wars, but this felt like the end. Jamal Porter's death still vivid in her mind, his blood soaking the cabin floor where Kane's militia had gunned him down. Kane's hard blue eyes glinted with wild triumph, his Stetson casting a shadow over his flushed face as he spun the revolver's chamber, taunting her with each click. "Thought you'd take me down, General?" he snarled, his voice a guttural rasp. "Feds, news, your little army friends, none of them can touch me here." She spat blood onto the floor, her vision swimming, but her glare unyielding. "Hear a dead man walking, Kane," she rasped, her voice raw. "They're coming." He laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the mill's peeling walls, and backhanded her, her head snapping to the side, fresh pain exploding in her jaw. "Keep dreaming," he said, stepping back to light a cigarette, the smoke curling up to the rafters. "Town's mine, militia's mine, and you're about to be a sad little suicide story." His deputies, Boyd and the scarred militia leader, stood by the door, rifles slung, their smirks mirroring his confidence. Aisha's mind raced, her body screaming, but her will steel. She'd planted a tracker in her boot before the safe house, a precaution Malik Stone had insisted on, its signal pinging to the feds. She just had to stall, keep Kane talking, buy time. "You think this ends with me?" she said, voice steady despite the blood trickling down her chin. "Whole world's watching you fall." Kane's smirk faltered, his cigarette pausing mid-drag, and he lunged, pistol whipping her across the face, the metal cracking her cheekbone. "Shut your damn mouth," he roared, his composure fraying, sweat beading on his brow. "I've run this county 20 years, ain't no outsider gonna change." "That!" She slumped, stars bursting in her skull, but taunted him again, words slurring through pain. 20 years of dirt, and it's all coming up now. Feds got your boys, your files, your lies. You're losing it, Kane. He froze, breathing heavy, his hand trembling as he raised the gun again, fury twisting his features. Boyd shifted uneasily, his wiry frame tense. "Sheriff, maybe we should move her. Feds might—" Kane spun on him, snarling. "They ain't here yet, are they? She's mine." Aisha smirked faintly, tasting blood, knowing she'd rattled him, his ego her weapon as the clock ticked. The scarred man coughed, breaking the tension. "She's stalling, boss. Finish it." Kane nodded, turning back to her, his revolver steadying as he pressed it to her forehead. "Night-night, General," he mocked, finger tightening on the trigger. Aisha braced, her heart slamming, when a faint hum vibrated through the mill, growing into a roar, headlights piercing the cracked windows. Kane froze, eyes darting, and she seized the moment, rocking the chair hard, tipping it sideways. The zip ties cut deeper, but she rolled free, slamming into Boyd's legs as he stumbled, his rifle clattering. Kane fired, the shot deafening, concrete exploding where her head had been, and she scrambled, kicking the scarred man's shin, buying seconds. Shouts erupted outside. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" And the mill doors burst open, FBI and tactical gear flooding in, rifles raised, voices booming. Kane spun, firing wild, bullets pinging off rusted beams as agents returned fire. A controlled burst that dropped Boyd, his body crumpling in a spray of blood. The scarred man dove for cover, but a sniper's round took him through the shoulder, pinning him screaming to the floor. Aisha crawled behind a steel drum, her bound hands fumbling as an agent sliced her ties, his gloved grip hauling her up. "General Hammond, you're safe," he barked, shoving her toward the exit as Kane roared, emptying his revolver at the swarm. Two agents tackled him, wrenching his arms back, his Stetson tumbling as they cuffed him, his face red with rage. "You can't do this," he bellowed, spitting as they dragged him out, his boots scraping concrete. Aisha staggered after them, the night air cool against her battered skin, medics rushing to her with a blanket and gauze. They patched her on site, taping her ribs, stitching her brow, her body a map of pain but alive. Kane glared from the back of an FBI van, his wrists cuffed, his empire shattered as agents swarmed the mill, bagging evidence, securing his last stand. Malik Stone arrived, his grizzled face tight with relief, clapping her shoulder. "Tracker worked. You're a damn miracle, Aisha." She nodded, wincing, her voice a croak. "Jamal didn't make it." Malik's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, guiding her to an ambulance as news choppers buzzed overhead, their lights painting the scene. She'd broken free, turned Kane's execution into his arrest, and the feds had him cold. She sank onto a stretcher, exhaustion crashing over her, victory bitter with Jamal's blood on her hands. "It's over," she muttered, believing it as they drove her to a hospital 20 miles out, Pine Hollow shrinking in the distance. She spent the night under guard, IVs dripping into her arm, the hospital's sterile hum a stark contrast to the mill's chaos. By morning she was released, bruises blooming purple across her skin, but her stride steady as she met Nadia Price in the lobby, her attorney's eyes red from sleepless nights. "Kane's locked up, no bail," Nadia said, handing her a coffee, its warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Feds found a stash of forged warrants in his safe, ties to the militia. He's done." Aisha sipped, the bitter taste grounding her, and exhaled, relief washing through her. She'd survived, fought Kane to his knees and walked away. They drove to a motel in Memphis, Nadia's sedan a lifeline after Earl's truck, and Aisha crashed on the bed, The first real rest in days. Thinking she'd won, the war finally hers. Dusk settled, the motel's neon sign buzzing outside when it happened. She stepped out for air, stretching her stiff legs, when a blast rocked the parking lot, a fireball erupting from her room, shattering windows, hurling debris into the sky. Aisha dove behind a dumpster, her ears ringing, heat searing her back. As flames swallowed the bed she'd left seconds ago. Nadia screamed from the car, "Aisha!" scrambling to her as smoke billowed black and thick. Aisha coughed, peering through the haze, and saw them, Kane's loyalists, 3 men in hoodies retreating to a pickup, one tossing a Molotov cocktail's rag into the ditch. They'd bombed her, a brutal counterstrike despite Kane's arrest, his reach slithering beyond bars. She staggered to her feet, blood trickling from a fresh cut on her arm, realization crashing in. She'd thought victory was hers, Kane caged, but his hate lived on, striking harder, deadlier, proving he'd never surrender. The motel burned, sirens wailing in the distance, and Aisha stood, battered but unbowed, knowing the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Aisha Hammond crouched behind a dumpster in the Memphis motel parking lot, her ears ringing from the blast that had torched her room, shards of glass and flaming debris raining around her as the night sky glowed orange. Her bruised body ached, fresh blood trickling from a cut on her arm where a splinter had grazed her, the heat from the fire searing her skin even from 20 feet away. Sheriff Luther Kane's loyalists had struck, their Molotov cocktail a brutal reminder that his arrest in the mill hadn't ended the war, only shifted it. Nadia Price stumbled from the sedan, her face pale, shouting Aisha's name over the crackle of flames as sirens wailed in the distance, closing in fast. Aisha rose, wincing, her ribs screaming from the mill beating, and scanned the lot, spotting the pickup peeling out, 3 hooded figures vanishing into the Tennessee dark. She'd thought Kane was finished, cuffed and caged, but his hate lived on, a venomous thread she couldn't cut. "They're not done," she rasped, staggering to Nadia, the acrid smoke stinging her lungs. They ducked into the sedan as fire trucks roared in, hoses blasting the blaze, cops swarming the scene with barking radios. Nadia gunned the engine, weaving through the chaos, her hands trembling on the wheel. "Kane's behind this," she said, voice tight. "Even locked up, he's pulling strings." Aisha nodded, wiping blood from her arm with her sleeve, her mind racing despite the pain. She'd survived his fists, his militia, his fire, but this was chess now, and he'd played a move she hadn't seen coming. "We need to end him," she said, voice steel. "Not just him, the whole damn system." Nadia glanced at her, eyes wide but resolute, and nodded. "Malik's still in play, let's go underground." They drove to a safe house Malik Stone had secured, a nondescript duplex on Memphis's outskirts, its blinds drawn tight, its walls a shield against Kane's reach. Inside, Malik waited, his grizzled frame hunched over a laptop, his retired colonel's growl, greeting them as they locked the door. "I heard about the motel," he said, shoving a coffee mug into Aisha's hands, its warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Feds are pissed, doubling down." He'd brought intel, a stack of printouts from federal contacts, and Aisha sank onto a sagging couch, her battered body protesting as she flipped through them. Bank records, wire transfers, a slush fund tied to Kane, millions embezzled from county seizures, funneled to private retreats, campaign bribes, even payoffs to state officials. "This is bigger than Pine Hollow," she said, voice hoarse but sharp. "He's got hooks in the capital." Malik nodded, tapping a photo of a slick-haired man in a suit. "Governor's aide, Trent Waller, Kane's puppet master." Nadia swore, pacing the room. "We leak this, it's nuclear." Aisha's mind clicked, a plan forming through the haze of pain. She'd survived Kane's worst, turned his attacks into evidence, and now she had the key to his empire. She emailed the Memphis news station from Malik's laptop, attaching the slush fund files, her words blunt. "Sheriff Kane's just the tip. Corruption runs to the governor's door. Here's the proof." She hit send, the ping a gunshot in the quiet room, and leaned back, exhaustion warring with resolve. "They'll have to act," she said, sipping the coffee, its bitterness grounding her. "Feds, state, everyone." Malik grinned, a rare crack in his stern face. "You're burning it all down, General." Nadia nodded, pulling out her phone. "I'll call the DA. Get these to the right hands." They worked fast, Malik faxing copies to federal agents, Nadia briefing a trusted prosecutor, the safe house humming with purpose. By morning, the story broke, national headlines screaming, "Pine Hollow Sheriff linked to statewide corruption." Ring millions embezzled. Aisha watched on the laptop, the anchor's voice cutting through static. New evidence ties Sheriff Luther Kane to a slush fund implicating state officials, including governor's aide Trent Waller. Protests erupted statewide. Memphis streets choked with marchers. Pine Hollow's town square overrun as locals turned on their own corrupt elite. Feds raided Waller's office by noon, cuffing him on live TV, his polished suit rumpled as he shouted denials. Aisha's chest swelled, a bruised triumph blooming as Malik clapped her shoulder. "Checkmate," he said, voice gruff. "Kane's done, and he's taking them with him." Nadia hung up with the DA, her face alight. Mass. Arrests Kane's locked without bail, militia leaders nabbed. It's collapsing. Pine Hollow shifted. News clips showing Mayor Clara Dunn at a podium, her voice firm. "We're cleaning house, new sheriff, oversight board, full audit." Aisha exhaled, the safe house's stale air tasting like victory, real and hard-won. She'd survived the ditch, the mill, the bomb, and now Kane's empire was ash, his cronies falling like dominoes. She leaned back, the couch creaking, her body a map of scars, but her spirit unbroken. "We did it," she said, voice soft. "Jamal's." Death a shadow on her win. Malik nodded, pouring more coffee. "Town's waking up, you lit the fire." Nadia smiled, rare and warm. "You're a damn force, Aisha." They toasted with chipped mugs, the clink a quiet celebration, and she let herself believe it, the war winding down, justice clawing through the rot. Afternoon brought calm, the safe house a bunker of relief, as Aisha showered off days of blood. And grime, the hot water stinging her cuts but cleansing her soul. She dressed in Malik's spare clothes, a too-big flannel and jeans, and stepped outside for air, the Memphis sun warm on her swollen face. She'd rest, then leave. Pine Hollow a memory she'd bury with Marcus's ashes. She walked to a press conference downtown, Malik and Nadia flanking her, the crowd parting as she approached the courthouse steps, reporters buzzing like flies. Mayor Dunn spoke first, outlining reforms, then handed her the mic, her presence a beacon after weeks of chaos. Aisha took it, her voice steady despite the pain. "I came to settle an estate, not fight a war," she said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "But Kane made it one. This isn't just my win, it's yours. Keep fighting." She stepped back, applause, rippling through the throng, when a crack split the air, a sniper's bullet grazing her shoulder, blood spraying as she dove behind the podium. Screams erupted, Malik tackling her down. Nadia shouting for medics as the crowd scattered, chaos swallowing her moment. Aisha clutched her arm, pain searing, and glimpsed a figure on a rooftop, a Kane loyalist in militia gear, rifle glinting, before he vanished. Medics swarmed, bandaging her on the steps, her blood staining the concrete as cops fanned out, hunting the shooter. Malik swore, his grip tight on her good arm. "Bastard still got teeth." Nadia's face paled. Phone. Out calling feds as Aisha gritted her teeth, the wound shallow but the message deep. She'd won, toppled Kane, gutted his network, but his hate struck back, a final claw from the grave. They rushed her to a hospital, stitching her shoulder under bright lights, her mind churning through the haze of painkillers. Kane was jailed, his empire dust, but his loyalists lingered, a cancer she couldn't excise. She'd thought checkmate was hers, the board cleared, but this was a draw, his shadow stretching beyond bars. Discharged by night, she sat in the safe house, arm in a sling, staring at the slush fund files. "It's not over," she said, voice hard. "They'll keep coming." Malik nodded, loading a pistol from his duffel. "Then we keep fighting." Nadia typed furiously, emailing more leaks, her resolve mirroring Aisha's. She'd dismantled Kane's world, but peace was a mirage, the war shifting to a new front. She stood, wincing, and vowed to root out every last thread, knowing the sniper's miss was just a warning, the real blow still lurking in the dark. Aisha Hammond stood on the Memphis courthouse steps, her arm in a sling from the sniper's graze, the morning sun warming her bruised face as a crowd of hundreds gathered below, their signs a forest of defiance. Justice prevails. End. Corruption now. It was 3 days after Sheriff Luther Kane's loyalists bombed her motel room, 2 days since she, Malik Stone, and Nadia Price had leaked his slush fund, toppling a statewide network of dirty officials. At 59, she'd come to Pine Hollow to settle her brother Marcus's estate, not to wage a war. But Kane had forced her hand, and now she'd won. The feds had him locked without bail, his deputies cuffed, his militia scattered, and governors. Aide Trent Waller was in custody, his arrest a domino that felled Pine Hollow's corrupt elite. Aisha's shoulder throbbed, her ribs ached from the mill beating, but she stood tall, her borrowed flannel shirt a badge of survival, as Mayor Clara Dunn handed her the microphone, the crowd hushing to hear her speak. "I didn't ask for this." "Fight," she began, her voice steady despite the pain, cutting through the humid Tennessee air. "I came to bury a brother, not a system. But Kane turned Pine Hollow into a battlefield, and you, all of you, fought back with me. This isn't my victory, it's ours." Applause erupted, hands clapping, voices cheering, a swell of pride lifting her chest. She scanned the faces, black and white, young and old, a town waking from Kane's shadow. "We've got a new sheriff starting today," she continued, nodding to a stocky black woman in uniform beside Dunn, "and an oversight board to keep power in check. This is a beginning, not an end." The crowd roared, signs waving, and Aisha stepped back, handing the mic to Dunn, who outlined reforms. Audits, body cameras, a civilian task force. Aisha's lips twitched into a faint smile, her war-weary body easing as she soaked in the moment, hailed as a hero who'd broken a tyrant, Malik. Stone stood beside her, his grizzled face softened by a rare grin, his hand on her good shoulder. "You did it, General," he said, voice low. "Kane's gone, the rot's exposed." Nadia Price joined them, her braids glinting in the sun, her eyes bright with exhaustion and triumph. "State's reeling," she said, pocketing her phone. "Waller's singing, more arrests coming?" Aisha nodded, the weight of weeks lifting. Jamal Porter's death a quiet ache beneath her relief. Protesters chanted her name, "Aisha, Aisha!" and news choppers buzzed overhead, their cameras catching her battered but unbowed silhouette. She'd survived the stops, the jail, the fire, the beating, the bomb, the sniper, and now stood atop. The wreckage, Pine Hollow hers to leave behind. She'd rest, then head back to Nashville, this chapter closed, justice carved from chaos. Reporters swarmed as she descended the steps, Malik and Nadia flanking her, their questions abuzz. She waved, off with a tired hand. "No more statements," she said, her voice firm. "The work's done." They drove back to the safe house, a duplex cloaked in Memphis's sprawl, its blinds shut tight, and Aisha sank onto the couch, kicking off her boots, the sling chafing her neck. Malik brewed coffee, Nadia typed up final notes for the DA, and the TV flickered to life, showing Pine Hollow's new sheriff swearing in, the crowd still cheering. Aisha sipped her mug, the bitter warmth grounding her, and let herself believe it. Kane was buried, his empire ash, and she'd walk away free. "I'm out tomorrow," she said, setting the cup down. "Time to breathe." Malik nodded, Nadia smiled, and the room settled into a rare calm, the war's roar fading to a hum. That night she showered, the hot water soothing her cuts, washing away the last of Pine Hollow's grime. She slept deep, dreamless, the first real rest since Marcus's death dragged her here, her body sinking into the safe house's lumpy mattress. Dawn broke grey and soft, rain tapping the roof as she packed her duffel, borrowed clothes and a spare phone, all she had left after the hour. Fires and bombs. Malik drove her to the bus station, Nadia riding shotgun, the sedan's wipers slapping a steady beat. "You sure you don't want a ride to Nashville?" Malik asked, his gruff voice tinged with concern. Aisha shook her head, managing a faint smile. "Bus is fine. Need the quiet." They hugged her goodbye, Malik's grip firm, Nadia's lingering, and she boarded the Greyhound, settling by a window as it rolled out, Memphis shrinking behind her, Pine Hollow a memory she'd buried deep. She'd planned to vanish, to heal, to let the world forget her name, but fate had claws sharper than Kane's. 2 days later, she stood in a Nashville hotel room, her sling off, her shoulders stiff but mending, watching Kane's trial begin. On a cheap TV. The feds had moved fast, his arraignment a circus, cameras catching his snarls as he pleaded not guilty from a jail cell. Aisha flipped channels, sipping a soda, when CNN dropped a bombshell, the anchor's voice cutting through her calm. Explosive testimony from Sheriff Luther Kane's trial reveals a stunning twist. Sources say Kane was a pawn in a broader scheme orchestrated by Governor Richard Hale, aimed at suppressing black dissent across Tennessee. Aisha froze, the can slipping from her hand, soda fizzing onto the carpet as her mind reeled, the room tilting under the weight of the revelation. The screen flashed to Kane, cuffed in an orange jumpsuit. His testimony lived from the stand. "Hale called the shots," he growled, his face flushed but his eyes cold. "Said outsiders like her were stirring trouble, needed to be crushed. Gave me the funds, the orders, told me to make examples." Reporters scrambled, the courtroom erupting as the anchor cut in. "Governor Hale has resigned effective immediately, citing health concerns, but federal investigators are probing his role." Aisha's breath caught, her bruised fists clenching, the victory she'd claimed unraveling into a nightmare. She'd beaten Kane, toppled his network, but he was a puppet, a thug, swinging for a master she hadn't seen. Hale's face flashed. On screen, silver hair slicked back, his polished smile a mask over decades of quiet hate, now fleeing accountability. Her phone buzzed, Malik's name lighting up, his voice a roar when she answered. "How you watching this? Hale's the head, Aisha, the whole damn thing was his." She nodded, though he couldn't see, her jaw tight. "I'm seeing it. Kane was just the muscle." Nadia patched in, breathless. "Feds are blindsided, digging into Hale's records now. This goes deep." Aisha paced, the hotel's thin carpet muffling her steps, fury surging through her veins. She'd thought she'd won, dismantled a sheriff, cleaned a town, but Hale had played her, used Kane to take the fall while he slipped free. The protests, the reforms, her scars, all pawns in his game, a racist chessboard she'd only half cleared. "He's not getting away," she said, voice steel ending the call as she grabbed her duffel, resolve hardening into a blade. She met Malik and Nadia at a diner off I-40, rain streaking the windows as they hunched over coffee and laptops, piecing together Hale's shadow. Malik had hacked contacts pulling state files, Nadia had DA leaks, and Aisha's mind churned, connecting dots from Kane's slush fund to Hale's quiet directives. "Waller was the middleman," Nadia said, tapping a printout. "Hale funded. Kane, through him, targeted black communities, kept it off the books." Malik slid over a photo, Hale shaking Kane's hand at a fundraiser, their smiles a pact sealed in blood. Aisha's stomach twisted, Jamal's death flashing fresh, her house's ashes a signature of Hale's hate. "He wanted dissent dead," she said, voice low. "I was the spark he couldn't snuff." They worked through the night, emailing, every outlet leaking Hale's ties to the feds, a storm brewing as the diner's neon buzzed overhead. By morning, the world exploded again, headlines screaming, "Governor Hale, implicated in racist conspiracy, ordered Sheriff Kane's attacks." Protests swelled, Nashville's streets choked with marchers, Pine Hollow's reforms dwarfed by a state unraveling. Hale's resignation crumpled under scrutiny, feds raiding his mansion, his polished facade cracking as evidence piled high, emails, payoffs, a memo calling Aisha a threat to order. She watched from the safe house, now back in Memphis, the TV a window to chaos she'd ignited. Malik grinned, Nadia typed furiously, and Aisha stood, her sling gone, her stance firm despite the scars. She'd beaten Kane, thought it was over. But Hale's fall was the real win, a titan toppled by her relentless fight. Then the final twist landed, a leaked order from Hale's desk, aired live on MSNBC. Neutralize Aisha Hammond, designate as terrorist threat, national security priority. The anchor's voice shook. Federal manhunt launched for General Hammond, accused of orchestrating unrest. Aisha's blood ran cold, Malik swearing as Nadia dropped her phone, the room spinning under the betrayal. Hale's parting gift, A frame-up so bold it rewrote her as the villain, her victory flipped to fugitivity. Sirens wailed outside, feds closing in, not as saviors but hunters, her name a target on every screen. "We've got to move," Malik barked, grabbing his pistol. But Aisha stood still, duffel in hand, her bruised face a mask of defiance. She'd dismantled a sheriff, a governor, a system, but they'd turned her into prey, a terrorist in their lie. "I'm not running blind," she said, voice cutting through the panic. "They want a fugitive. I'll give them a reckoning." She slipped out the back, Malik and Nadia covering her, the rain cloaking her as she vanished into Memphis's sprawl, hunted but unbroken. Hale was down, Kane was caged, but the war stretched wider, deeper, a nation's rot exposed. Aisha Hammond, hero turned outlaw, vowed to fight on. Her scars a map to justice, her flight a promise of retribution they'd never see coming. Aisha Hammond's journey in Pine Hollow unveils raw truths about power, resilience, and justice. The first lesson is that systemic racism isn't just loud slurs or overt violence. It's a quiet, insidious web woven into institutions, as seen in Sheriff Luther Kane's unchecked reign and Governor Hale's shadow orders targeting black dissent. Aisha's fight shows how deeply corruption can root itself when accountability falters, thriving in silence until someone dares to speak. Her survival through arrests, beatings, and bombings teaches that resilience isn't passive endurance, but active defiance, a refusal to bow even when the odds stack high. She turned every attack into evidence, proving that courage can weaponize truth against tyranny. Another takeaway is the power of collective action. Aisha didn't win alone. Protesters, allies like Jamal, Malik, and Nadia, and even a trucker named Earl fueled her battle. One voice sparked a movement, showing that change demands unity, not just heroes. Yet the shocking twist, Hale framing her as a terrorist, reveals justice's fragility. Victories can flip to traps when power rewrites narratives. It's a stark reminder that the fight doesn't end with one villain's fall. It's a relentless push against a system that adapts to protect itself. For us, the lesson is vigilance. Aisha's story urges us to question authority, expose rot, and stand firm because silence empowers oppressors. So what's your take? Would you risk everything like Aisha to confront injustice, or is the cost too steep when the system bites back? Comment below with your thoughts, hit like if her grit inspires you, and subscribe for more tales of unbreakable spirits. Share this to spark the conversation, because awareness is our first strike against corruption. Thanks for joining this journey. Stay bold, stay just, and may you always find strength to fight the good fight.